Aisha sat by the window, staring at the empty street. The ticking clock on the wall echoed in the silence of the house. She had been waiting for Hassan for hours, but once again, work had taken precedence. She glanced at the cold dinner on the table, another night spent eating alone. She picked up her phone and hesitated before typing a message. "Are you coming home soon?" A few minutes later, his reply came. "Late night. Don't wait up." No explanation, no apology, just routine indifference. Sighing, she placed the phone down, suppressing the familiar ache in her chest. This had become normal. The man who once couldn't bear to be apart from her now barely noticed her presence. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. She opened it to find Sami standing there, holding a bag of snacks and wearing his usual easygoing smile. "Figured you'd be bored. Thought I'd stop by," he said, stepping inside before she could refuse. She managed a small smile. "Hassan isn't home." "I know. That's why I'm here," he said lightly, placing the bag on the table. Sami had always been around. He was Hassan's best friend, practically family. But lately, his presence felt different. He filled the silence Hassan left behind. He made her laugh, something she hadn't done in a long time. "You're quiet today," Sami observed, watching her carefully. She shrugged. "Just tired." He leaned back, stretching his arms over the couch. "You should get out more. Staying locked up in this house won't do you any good." She scoffed. "And go where?" "Alone." He smirked. "I could always take you out. Friendly company, nothing scandalous." Aisha laughed softly. "People would talk." "Let them," he said casually. "Who cares?" She shook her head, but a part of her liked that he didn't see her as just Hassan's wife. He saw her. As the days passed, she started looking forward to Sami's visits more than she admitted to herself. She started caring about how she looked before he came over, nothing obvious, just small changes. A touch of lipstick, a new pair of earrings. One evening, as she poured tea, Sami watched her closely. "You've changed," he said. She frowned. "How?" "You smile more when I'm around," he replied. "But when I mention Hassan, it disappears." Her fingers tightened around the teacup. "That's not true." He didn't argue. He just sipped his tea, his gaze unreadable. Then, one night, the power went out. The house was bathed in darkness except for the dim glow of a candle. Aisha reached for her phone, but Sami stopped her. "Leave it," he said. "It's nice like this." She hesitated, then let the silence settle. The flickering light cast shadows across his face, making him look different, less the familiar friend, more the man she wasn't supposed to notice. "You ever feel like you're invisible?" she asked suddenly. He didn't answer right away. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "Only when I'm around people who don't see me." Her breath caught. She wasn't sure who moved first, but suddenly, his hand was on hers. His touch was warm, grounding. Aisha's pulse pounded in her ears. This was the moment, the point where a decision had to be made. She could pull away, pretend this never happened. Or she could lean into the feeling that terrified her. Before she could choose, the lights flickered back on. Reality rushed in, shattering whatever spell had taken hold. Sami pulled his hand away, his expression unreadable. She stood abruptly, her heart racing. "It's late. You should go." He nodded but hesitated at the door. It was as if he wanted to say something. But in the end, he just gave her a small nod and left. Aisha stood there long after he was gone, staring at the empty space where he had been. Guilt curled in her stomach, but it wasn't strong enough to drown out the truth. She had wanted him to stay. Hassan had been noticing the change long before Aisha fully understood it herself. Her laughter had become forced and her eyes often held a distant, troubled look that left him unsettled. Once, their evenings were filled with small talk and shared smiles, but now she barely spoke, her attention slipping away whenever Sami's name entered the conversation. Hassan first dismissed it as the toll of his long hours at work, assuming that stress might be the culprit. Yet, gradually, he observed that her demeanor shifted distinctly when Sami was nearby, the way her smile widened at his jokes, the lightness that seemed to replace the heaviness of her usual silence. It was subtle, but the implication was unmistakable. During a recent dinner with friends, Hassan watched them closely. Aisha's conversation with him had dwindled, replaced by an almost imperceptible exchange with Sami, a fleeting glance, charged with an emotion that didn't belong in their shared life. Though nothing overt occurred, that single look made something inside him twist with a growing sense of betrayal. The night passed in a blur of obligatory laughter and polite conversation, yet his thoughts kept returning to that moment. Later, as Aisha prepared for bed, he lingered by the doorframe and softly asked, "Everything okay?" Her response was a curt nod and a dismissive "I'm just tired," a reply that did little to satisfy the question lingering between them. Hassan stepped closer, his concern evident in his tone. "Is there something you want to tell me?" Her fingers gripped the edge of the dresser so tightly that he feared she might break under the pressure of her own secret. She met his searching gaze with one that was unreadable, betraying neither confession nor denial. Frustrated by the silence and the mounting weight of unspoken words, he sighed and let the moment pass with a resigned "forget it." Yet, as she turned away, the reflection in the mirror revealed eyes that were not just distant but undeniably guilty. In the following days, the pattern intensified. Sami's visits became sporadic, his absence marking a change in the delicate balance of their lives. Aisha's phone remained silent, no messages, no calls, until one day when Sami appeared again, his gaze avoiding hers entirely. "We should stop this," he said quietly, a statement laden with regret rather than anger. The words struck Aisha like a cold gust of wind. "Stop what?" she managed to ask, her voice barely audible. His short, humorless laugh was the only answer before he added, "You know what?" There was no fiery anger in his tone, just the heavy resignation of a friendship that had ventured too far. Aisha's stomach churned as she admitted softly, "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." His sad smile in response, paired with his simple acknowledgement, "I know." But it did, underscored the inevitability of their predicament. With those words, he walked away, leaving Aisha to confront the full weight of the consequences that had long been building. In that moment, the painful truth settled in: this wasn't merely about Sami, it was about the void in her marriage that she had tried desperately to fill with someone else's attention. That evening, the air felt heavier than ever as Aisha retreated into solitude. Sitting on the balcony, the cool night air offered little comfort as the city lights blurred into a distant, indifferent glow. Her thoughts spiraled, retracing the steps that had led her here. She had never intended to cross any final line, yet in the quiet recesses of her heart, she knew she had betrayed Hassan deeply, and worse, he was already aware of it in his own way. Later that night, the unspoken burden became too great to bear in silence. With a tremor in her voice, Aisha approached Hassan as he sat in bed, absorbed in his phone, trying to maintain the illusion of normalcy. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath. His first reaction was one of guarded skepticism. "Now you want to talk?" His tone was more weary than accusatory, as if he had been expecting this conversation for a long time. Taking a deep breath, she confessed, "I've been unhappy." The words hung between them, heavy and unavoidable. His grip on the phone tightened for a moment as if to brace himself against the inevitable. After a long, pregnant silence, she added, her voice barely above a whisper, "I let myself get too close to Sami." The admission was not theatrical, it was a simple statement of fact, laden with regret and sorrow. Hassan's reaction was not the outburst she had feared. Instead, he asked quietly, "Did you love him?" Her immediate response was a shake of her head. "No. I loved the way he made me feel. Like I mattered," she replied, her voice cracking under the weight of truth. His exhale was slow and pained as he stared blankly at the ceiling, the silence between them deepening into an almost unbearable chasm. "And I didn't?" he asked, his voice carrying the quiet hurt of a man who had long felt neglected. Aisha's throat tightened as she murmured, "Not for a long time." Their shared silence was heavy with unspoken admissions and mutual regret. It was then that Hassan finally broke the quiet, his words soft yet piercing. "I've been failing you, haven't I?" The admission, though painful, was a turning point, a mutual recognition of their shared responsibility for the distance that had grown between them. Her eyes burned with unshed tears as she responded, "We've been failing each other." For the first time in months, he looked at her with genuine regret, not just disappointment, as he continued, We can't change what happened, but if we don't fix this now, there won't be anything left to save. The gravity of his words sank in, and with a nod that carried the hope of rebuilding, Aisha whispered, "I don't want to lose us." In that quiet moment, Hassan reached for her hand. There was hesitation, a pause filled with the understanding that forgiveness and healing would not come easily, but as their fingers interlaced, it signified a tentative step towards reconciliation. The following day, as a final act of commitment to mending their fractured bond, Aisha deleted Sammy's number from her phone. There were no dramatic declarations, just the quiet determination that some paths were meant to be left behind. Now, with a profound understanding of the pain they had both endured, they faced the future with cautious hope. The conversation had been difficult, yet it carried the promise of rebuilding trust and reconnecting on a deeper level. They understood that while the past could not be erased, the future was still unwritten, open to healing, compromise, and the possibility of rediscovering what had once drawn them together. As the night gave way to a tentative dawn, the lingering echoes of regret slowly transformed into a commitment to change. Aisha realized that her journey through betrayal had been a harsh lesson in the cost of neglect and the importance of truly seeing one another. In the quiet intimacy of that new beginning, both she and Hassan resolved to address their shortcomings, to listen more deeply, and to rebuild the love that had, for too long, been left unattended.